I think for GBS to have that credible proposition, part of the sell of the model is you have those processes and you are driving standardization. And one of the benefits is you can harvest insight from all of those processes and provide that to the business. You have a unique position as almost like that control tower to provide a very clear line of sight of where the business should go in. It undermines that proposition if you haven't got hold of the data. And so, particularly in this day and age, in the digital evolution that we're going through, it has to be the core tenet of the next journey of GBS. It has to be.
Hey, welcome to Revolutionizing Business Operations with Tony Saldanha. I'm your host. And today we're exploring a question that sits at the very heart of modern finance leadership. What does global business services look like when you're viewing it from the CFO's chair? And how does data become the currency that determines whether GBS is truly strategic? Joining me is David Davies, a senior finance executive at the Boots Group, with a career that spans Walmart, Asda, and IVC Evidensia. David has spent decades building and leveraging GBS operating models, and he's been a consistent champion of data as a strategic asset. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Tony. It's good to see you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to talk about this and spend a bit of time. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, David. I'm going to start off by having you introducing yourself. What's your journey to here?
But no, it's been a very exciting journey. Been very lucky to have the opportunities that I've had over my career. Yeah, it's had a lot of variety. I've been very fortunate to work for some great companies across multiple industries, multiple product groups. And as I've charted my course, I've always looked for that challenge and ultimately opportunity. And then it's about proving yourself, obviously, day in, day out, and yeah, being able to grow to a place where I've been very lucky to have the experiences I've had. And yeah, it's when I look back over the last 20 years, it's been a lot of fun.
Well, knowing you as I do, David, I know skill had more to do with
Sure.
it than luck, but we're on the benefiting side of all of your experience. I did have a question for you. What drew you towards the more operational side of finance rather than the strategic or analytics or investor-facing roles?
Yeah, I think I am very passionate about being close to the business, being at the heartbeat and the rhythm of the business, and therefore I've always gravitated to those finance opportunities and scope that allows you to do that. One of my mantras, if you like, one of my sayings is if you control the process, you can control the numbers. And I've always lived by that. And therefore, yeah, again, that's probably gravitated me to the more operational side. It's clearly the numbers only happen if the engine room works well. And yeah, I do very much enjoy getting my hands dirty and working with the business.
That is so true, isn't it? At the end of the day, the only strategy that our customer sees is execution, the operation. Yeah. And that is well said. Now, when did this GBS versus CFO or finance thing click for you, in the sense that when did you start to realize that GBS could be more than just a cost optimization strategy?
Yeah, I think when it clicked was ultimately when you live and breathe it. And I was given a role when Asda offered a role to do a multifunctional GBS role and was thrown into it. And that's when it really clicked. But if I go back, I was first exposed to shared service 15 years ago. I was part of a CPG brand that was evolving their back office, and they moved to a shared service model then in Switzerland. So I was the market FD at the time. So you saw that sort of model develop from that seat. And you could see, obviously, the efficiencies and synergies and consolidation opportunity it brought. But obviously, you're seeing it from one side of the fence. And obviously, the model has evolved a lot since 15 years ago. And when I was offered that role, I just spoke about it at Asda. I really immersed into that model. And initially, it was obviously getting to grips with the core premise of GBS, the core service offering. But then it gave me the opportunity to look at how we ultimately expand the value and the offering of that facility at the time at Asda. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it clicked by ultimately doing it in a very important role, and had the ability, because of the scale and size of a business like Asda, to really look at what that model can do across multiple disciplines. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but there were some really good case studies of how GBS can really play up the value stream, as it were.
Yes, and I remember we go back several years, but that's one of the times when we first met. So I'm very eager to hear about success stories from that era. But one other question, because I know that for a lot of our listeners, in many cases, GBS reports into the CFO or into finance. And so they're always curious to understand, what does GBS look like from the traditional CFO's desk? Not so much somebody like yourself who's been on both sides of the fence and sees this as a strategic asset. What do most CFOs think of GBS?
I think it's, as you say, it's evolved over time. I'll be very direct. I don't like the traditional CFO badge and what that was for. I never sat in that seat. But for me, a CFO today has to be the key driver of value and the strategic direction of the business. And therefore you look for solutions to that. And therefore today I talk to a lot of CFOs, and they definitely see GBS, or the disciplines of GBS definitely can play a big role in that value creation space. It hasn't always been like that, probably, but it's definitely moved on. So yeah, there will always be an element of cost agenda to it. That's the reality of the world we live in.
Yeah.
But the cost can only take you so far. You need the other value lenses to kick in. And therefore, from the CFO seat, I would say, from my experience anyway, we see GBS as a real solution to a problem ultimately.
Yes. And in my experience, David, what's been interesting is that a lot goes into the mindset of the GBS organization as well, in the sense that if you're thinking that, all right, I'm going to have a CEO and a CFO who are going to anoint me as the transformation leader, and then I don't have to worry about things such as cost or operational efficiencies. In other words, I'm entitled. That's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, as you correctly said, you have to earn your stripes. You have to, first off, deliver the basics of efficiency. Then you've got to prove that you can do more than order taking. You can actually drive by influence. And then eventually, you've proven your worth. And that's when the equation works. So I think the point that you're making around, there's two sides of the story. There is the CFO or CEO side, where they understand more and more in today's world that GBS is a strategic asset. But the other side of the story is that you have to earn the right to be that.
Yeah. You do. And I think the best way to earn that, as you say, is deliver results, because your customer NPS goes up and you get more opportunity. So it shouldn't be as you say, an entitled mandate that comes from the board. Yes, that support is needed. Clearly, the direction of travel it needs to be clear, but then you've got to go and deliver it. And then it comes down to execution, which is where we started.
Yes. The other thing that intrigued me, as you and I have worked over the past several years, is your belief in data as a strategic asset, right? You've done this throughout your finance career, and you've done this at a time when most finance functions were still working off of spreadsheets and intuition. What drove you towards the direction of starting to leverage data as an asset?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this one when we were talking in the past. And when I reflect on my journey, particularly through the finance career to start with and the finance business partner, I recall and reflect on far too much time spent trying to mine data, be that intermediary between the source and the customer, trying to make sense of it. So, there was times when you weren't very an effective business partner because you were just being that data intermediary. So there was an inefficiency that drove some of my passion. There was just a curiosity around needing to have answers quickly and to provide real clarity to the business. So that all stems from, for me, a strong finance seat. And therefore, my desire and passion grew to want to make improvements in these areas whenever I had the opportunity to do that. And I can go back in time to many of my roles where we had a continuous improvement. methodology and mindset to start with. And then it grew into bigger opportunities in terms of how you improve it. But yeah, it all started from that journey of finance and the role of finance and being hindered by not having the right data assets and data quality.
There's nothing like experience as a taskmaster when it
Yeah.
comes to this particular topic of data, isn't it? Is there a particular incident that comes to mind, either when data was a major hindrance or it was a winning ingredient in a big story?
Yeah, there's a couple of examples. I can look at a negative that turned positive or just a positive. I look back at during COVID, there was a lot of challenges running operations at that time, and particularly at Asda when we had the scale of the challenge during COVID. I recall one use case where we had to hire hundreds of thousands of people very quickly to ultimately continue to provide products to our customers. And when you start to try and accelerate processes, poor data gets in the way. And that was potentially very costly. And I remember the power of GBS at the time. We were able to call upon the right expertise and resource to tactically correct some of the data issues, deploy automation, and we were able to accelerate processes and cycle times very quickly in a small window to get that particular, it was HR process ultimately to deliver value for the business.
A really good example. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, but then there was another example where we had the opportunity to develop a data and analytics discipline within that GBS environment at Asda, and we quickly set upon exploiting the opportunity to deliver value and product to the business by investing in some capability. And very quickly, we developed a really more mature reporting analytics product. We were starting to deliver data science products to the business. And that was just somewhat a mandate, but somewhat ultimately we saw opportunity and got after as a GBS leadership team. And that was all grounded in the power of data and using it correctly with the right expertise. And the business responded to that. They saw the power of a service model, of a capability delivering real value for the business.
Yeah, I had the privilege of talking to some of your folks at that time, and I can vouch for the value that you guys created. That was awesome. This topic of data is particularly both intriguing and vexing at the same time for a lot of GBS practitioners. What I mean by that is the reality is that GBS doesn't own end-to-end data for every given process, whether that's finance or procurement or suppliers or whatever it is. So we tend to own a particular percentage of that data. And as a result, most GBS organizations feel like they're the victims of what comes in from either upstream or what happens downstream from a process standpoint. David, as you and I know, if you look across the organization in a given company, there is no end-to-end organization unless you go all the way up to the CEO or COO or something like that. And so this thing about taking on the role of an orchestrator for data is such a unique opportunity, isn't it, for GBS organizations? Now, I want you to put on your CFO hat. What would it look like if GBS stepped up to that role and say, I know I don't own everything end to end, but I can at least play an orchestrator role?
Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't have to, and probably is not realistic to expect it to own it end to end. But I think the first key tenet is GBS should have good coverage of the process. And I think, as we know, there's an opportunity to really drive GBS through end-to-end processes. And depending on how far you get with that, obviously, then for me, process ownership is also about data ownership or data stewardship. And therefore, as a CFO, I hear every day we have issues with data. We need to invest more in data infrastructure. I hear it every day. But I'm not actually convinced some of it is the lack of internal capability. It's just how we're organized and how we're organized around process. So I think GBS can really step forward and provide an organizational solution, a process solution to that data orchestration. It is the backbone of the business, particularly in this day and age. And particularly retail businesses, notoriously known for not having great processes. GBS can get hold of that process as part of its construct, and at the same time then get hold of the data opportunity as well. Within that, they will obviously have to partner with the tech organization or whatever in terms of some of the bowels of the organization, in terms of infrastructure and getting some of that right. But I think GBS can provide a bigger enterprise solution without having to own everything, as you say. And that stems from ultimately process.
And you've hit the nail on the head on that last comment around process ownership. I think too often we in the GBS industry underestimate the importance of stepping up and saying, hey, I can drive process streamlining, or I can provide an orchestration role of processes. Because at the end of the day, there is no perfect organization design, right?
Yeah.
There will always be silos. I mean, if any organization is greater than 200 people, based on organization design principles, you're going to have some silos in there. So organization design is not the solution. Obviously, tech is not the solution because garbage in, garbage out. And so this is really the role that we play. And glad that you're bringing that topic to the fore.
Sorry, Tony, just to interrupt. I think also for GBS to have that credible proposition, part of the sell, let's say, of the model is you have those processes and you are driving standardization. And then one of the proposition benefits is you can harvest insight from all of those processes and provide that to the business. And you have a unique position as almost like that control tower to provide a very clear line of sight of where the business is going. It undermines that proposition if you haven't got hold of the data and understand it. For me, it devalues the proposition. So it's particularly as well in this day and age, in the digital evolution that we're going through, it has to be the core tenet of the next journey of GBS. It has to be.
It really does. And we know that 80% of most time and effort that's required for AI is in data prep. And so jumping onto the bandwagon of AI without having your foundations right is a fool's errand. And so this is something that I know you strongly believe in. When you think about AI in whatever form, whether it's basically machine learning or agentic or whatever it is, what's your guidance to both CFOs and GBS leader around the approach to building AI capabilities?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of my personal, you're all into something. And I think AI at the moment in too many organizations, people are dabbling with it. Yeah. And it's not providing real tangible examples of return yet because we're not really facing into it. So for me, you need that enterprise scale solution quickly because the world is moving on very fast. And therefore, the question is, how do you do that? How do you get the right infrastructure, processes, data, etc.? Because you need that. There's no point trying to automate something on a bad process because it won't last long. So you need to have the right focus and capability on that layer. And you need to have a mindset of this is an enterprise play, not a let's try some POCs and let's see where we can get to. Because I just think it runs out of steam. That's what I see. We do some good things, little user cases here and there, but you run out of steam. We now need a more structural solution to this. And therefore, GBS obviously can play a big role in this. But to answer your original question, it is about having the right foundations in place and process and data. And then it's developing and investing in that capability, but in a way that is also pointed to where the value is, because you can spend a lot of time with AI, but in the wrong places. And therefore, you need to have that business lens on where the value is and be close to the business. And then I think there's a real opportunity. I really do. I think there's a lot of excuses at the moment. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier. Part of it is how you are organized, particularly in a complex business, when resources are finite, when everybody has their own individual agendas, when processes are not connected. You're never going to get to that scale unless you do something different structurally.
That point around nobody's got the time or the money to dabble into it is a particular dilemma for a lot of GBS leaders, because most GBSs operate with very thin margins, actually no margins at all. The question then becomes, all right, I know there's this freight train called AI coming at me. I don't have any budget, and I try and make a case to the business around, hey, I need a little bit of budget to work on some use case, and I don't get it. So I'm framing the dilemma as I hear it from a lot of GBS leaders. Now, you and I know that's a little bit of a weak argument, because there are ways in which you can get going on that journey without becoming the victim of, I don't have time and I don't have money. I'd like you to share your advice to a GBS leader that thinks in that manner.
I coach them pretty quickly to think differently. There's a saying I like, there's no such word as can't. And it's a chicken and an egg, as we say. You can keep going around in circles there. I don't have the money at the time. You've got to create the opportunity. And some of these examples, it's the classic: start small, think big, scale fast. If you can present an opportunity, we start small. It doesn't have to start with a big investment ask. It can be broken down. And also it's about delivering value iteratively. It's showing value every 4, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. And that value doesn't have to be big, but it can illustrate the potential bigger opportunity. So some of this is about mindset, some of this is about approach, but it's an excuse to say we don't get the budget or we don't. It's actually just the mindset of seeing value and then getting after it.
The key, in my experience, is to always leverage your strengths when you're faced with a dilemma like this. And the strength of most GBS organizations is that we actually have people. We've got people, we've got data, as we were saying earlier, and nothing prevents us. Let's say I have 100 people, and I'm committed to saving 5 out of those 100 FTEs next year. Nothing prevents me from saving 7 or 8, and then having the extra savings be dedicated towards these small little quick wins that you're talking about, because it's such a iterative way to not just gain experience, but to gain credibility as you go and then make a case. The two options are you go cold calling to your business leader and say, I need $100 million for this big AI project, and you've got no previous experience to do that. Or you go in, deliver quick wins and say, hey, for the next year, if you could give me a few million, I could actually scale this example that I just showed you. And that's really the difference between proactive leadership and feeling like you don't have any cards to play with, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I fully agree, Tony. And also there's sometimes you can have situations where there's almost too many ideas. And I think people can be spread too thinly, or asks can be spread too thinly. And I think there needs to be that funnel approach where, it's a bit similar to start small, think big, but the funnel approach where narrow the funnel and go with the strongest hypothesis and then go execute. And there's no more powerful than actually delivering results, even however small they may seem. If you say you're going to do something and you do it, your credibility clearly builds.
There you go. Nothing succeeds like success. And on that note, David, I was excited to talk with you because I know you've got a lot of very good stories from your past, war stories, successes, and then also learnings. So what I'm going to do is go back and ask you to think about maybe a couple of them. Let's start with one. Is there any particular incident in your GBS history that you think was pivotal to the organization, either in terms of driving a certain direction or providing a capability that was direction changing to the organization?
Yeah, I think we've talked about the theme of data. I have to say that the best example is, there's two examples actually, but the one example is when we developed that automation capability within that GBS environment. And it was, first of all, the objective was to develop the capability to make GBS more efficient. But what we then found out was there was actually so many use cases in the business, and they didn't have the capability. And when they saw some of the execution of those automations in GBS, they started to come to us, the business, to say, could that be a automation as a service opportunity for us?
Yeah.
And whilst we started very small to start with, a team of 2 or 3, we started to build the team almost like a center of excellence. And we started to go out to the business to provide that service. And we started to quickly develop use cases. They're only small to start with, but in supply chain, in logistics, of actually deploying, at the time it was RPA, which obviously we've moved on a bit from that. But I think it opened the eyes to the business of automation is something you can actually make work within a business. So there was a really good period of growth around how we developed that capability. And we reflect on it saying it did definitely help the business open their eyes to something different in terms of how we make manual process at that time in that example work.
That's a really good story. And it's one that illustrates a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about in this discussion. Iterate, start small, earn the credibility, scale it, and before you know it, you're a hero inside the organization. So that's a good one. You mentioned you had another example.
I'll go for a bad one, maybe to balance it
Yeah,
out.
go for it.
But no, the bad, not so bad one's a strong word, but the desire and at the time to grow a GBS, you've got to make sure you approach it in the right way and you play in the right spaces. And there was a couple of examples, one in particular where we were trying to develop a model within the commercial buying function. And there was an example where we took on some bad processes, we took on some work, we were trying to show proactivity, but it came back to bite us on the bum, basically, in terms of those processes didn't execute well. The inputs were poor upstream, but that didn't matter because GBS had their footprint all over it. And therefore, we had some challenges operationalizing that ongoing. We course corrected eventually, but I look back at quite a small example like that in the grand scheme of things, but it made me think about how you approach situations, how you make sure you stick to your core principles, and don't let them drift is the key point.
That's the most important thing at the end of the entire journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're never going to win them all. And when we view every challenge as a learning opportunity, that's the recipe to getting better. And David, I know you've done that, and you're a shining example of turning issues into positive opportunities. So thank you for sharing that with us. I do want to spend a few minutes on you wearing a CFO hat, looking into the future of GBS and sharing with our listeners what you think. So what do you think is the future of GBS from a CFO's perspective?
I think it's very clear. Its future is built around that data and AI opportunity. And I almost think it will become, or it should become anyway, in my eyes, a toolkit of solutions to different business problems, whether that be process, whether that be organizationally. And clearly some of that is happening today, but I think it needs to be supercharged. I think it needs to be upgraded. And for me, that is the future of GBS, grounded in capability, which is arguably no different to what many GBS organizations are focusing on today, but capability with that digital and data bias and having an ability to move at the same pace as what we're seeing everywhere. And if GBS can provide the solution to that at scale, continued at scale, and I'm talking enterprise here, no longer back office, middle office, it's agnostic, then that for me is the future of GBS. If it doesn't stay relevant and continue, particularly grounded that capability, then it can easily become something that becomes less relevant quite quickly.
That's very exciting because I strongly believe that there's never been a better time than now to be a GBS leader. Yeah. But as they say in the comics, with great power comes great responsibility. And so I think a large part of the responsibility is to stay relevant, to not let the tools and the excitement deter us from what you previously said is the core principles, which is creating business value. And so that's, I think, a really good place for GBS to be in. And along those lines, I know that with the specific experiences, skill sets you've had, and the incredible journey that you've had in your career, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are at the beginning of their journey that are looking to you and saying, hey, I'd love to be in that place 20, 30, 40 years from now. What advice would you give somebody who's at the beginning of the journey?
Two pieces of advice. One is focus on what you're good at, focus on your strengths and make them even better. I think too many times you think you have to focus on your weaknesses, but I think teams should focus on what they're good at and make it even better, make it an even bigger strength. So that would be one piece of advice. And secondly, get after the opportunities. And even if they may not feel immediate opportunities, don't be afraid to go out of the comfort zone and look for new challenges, ask for new challenges. That tests you, it puts you in different spaces to learn. And that's what I've done in my career. And that would be the best piece of advice if I were to start again, is continue out with a mindset of delivery, but looking for new challenges at every opportunity.
Always stretch yourself. David, this has been a genuinely illuminating conversation about what it means to run GBS and modern finance with data at the center. You've shown us that the CFO's lens isn't just about financial performance. It's about data and information and decision-making and building credibility And all of those are factors that most GBS organizations can be playing in at this very moment. For our listeners, the message is clear. Data is not just an IT problem, it's a CFO imperative. And with that, David, before I let you go, any final comments for our listeners?
No, nothing major. First of all, thank you, Tony, for your time, and thank you for your help throughout some of my journey. I very much enjoyed the support you've given me. But no, I think I'd finish where I started. There's so many opportunities, particularly on the space of GBS and people who work in that space. And as I said, stick to your core principles and embrace every opportunity you can.
That's awesome. Thank you, David, for sharing your insights with us. To our audience, thank you for listening to Revolutionizing Business Operations. This is Tony Saldanha. Stay innovative.